So you can all remain in your meditation posture, because one of the nicest ways to listen to the Dhamma is always to sit meditation with your eyes closed, making the mind very peaceful and just allowing the words to flow through you. Sometimes people think they have to look at the teacher, have to look around, but it's not really necessary. We can just change posture gently if we feel that we need to change posture, or we can just try to maintain the mind in the mode of meditation and just allowing the words just to flow through and to see if there's anything useful you can gather from this morning's Dhamma talk, which is supposed to be on overcoming difficulties. Difficulties are par for the course, as they say. Having been born in this human body, this human form, being alive, if there weren't any difficulties, I always say, then we didn't really need a Buddha. If we didn't have any difficulties, then we didn't need a Buddha. But the Buddha was right. He taught the Four Noble Truths about dukkha. If you want, you can today translate that as difficulties. I usually translate it as suffering. Someone on the retreat recently suggested that one shouldn't actually call it suffering because it sounds too depressing. But actually, we all know, if we're honest, there is a lot of suffering in life. And we do get our share from time to time. Sometimes we're happy, sometimes we suffer, then we're happy again, then we suffer again. And that's just the way life goes. Happiness, as someone once said, is just a little gap between two moments of suffering. And suffering is just the gap between two moments of happiness. So, being alive means we get, if we're lucky, or if we have good karma, we get an equal share. But none of us really can go through life without ever experiencing any difficulties. And so, welcome to the world. How are we going to deal with that? What are we going to do about that? And the first thing to really do is to accept it as I said, par for the course. It's normal. We don't have to assume that something is wrong with us if we experience difficulties, because we all do from time to time. And so accepting the fact that at this moment, at this particular time, there are such and such difficulties. Never say that my life is difficult or my life is hopeless, because then you're just assuming that you're hopeless and that you're never going to get out of your difficulties again. It's just a momentary thing. And if we have the wisdom and follow the Buddha's teaching, we develop qualities around difficult times that can actually help us to live a more skillful and, in the end, a more fulfilling and beautiful life. Because difficulties are the times where we can learn. During difficult times, we have to use our wisdom. Someone once said, life is easy when it flows like a sweet song. But a man worthwhile is a man with a smile when everything goes dead wrong. So we use the opportunity. We look at dukkha, at difficulties, as our teacher. Because after all, the Buddha was a realist. Someone suggested the Buddha was a pessimist because he taught about suffering. But that's not true. The Buddha was realistic because he saw that looking into this world, there are a lot of people who have difficulties. It's not just us. So we don't get into this mood of why me? Why do I have to experience this? But we're quite honestly looking at it and saying, okay, I can accept it. Now I have to look for ways and means to deal with it. So whatever difficulties we have in life, we see it as an opportunity to develop our wisdom. And there are many other qualities that we can develop around difficult times, and such as, for instance, patience. Patience and endurance, once the Buddha said, are the supreme destroyers of all defilements. Simply because many difficulties disappear by themselves just through us waiting out the time. Being patient, enduring, bearing with difficult times is in and of itself a very good way to overcome difficulties. Because we know everything is impermanent. Difficult times are impermanent, happy times are impermanent. So when we do encounter a difficult time, we used to develop this quality of patience and endurance. It's something that, I notice in especially the younger generation, and I say this and it sounds funny because it means that I'm getting old, but the younger generation seems to have even more, seems to have even less patience than the generation that I was brought up in. And the generation before that had a lot more patience. Imagine those people who were born during the war or during really difficult times. What the hardship they had to endure was enormous. Or sometimes I reflect on I was living in Australia and there were the people that came over because they had nothing left in Vietnam after the war, and they came over in a boat. There was one family who came over, and the wife was pregnant and they had another child and the husband, and so they were in this tiny little boat, and they had to get all the way across to Australia, and there were storms and there were all sorts of dangers threatening them, and it was real hardship. They had lost everything. But then they picked up the pieces, came to Australia, worked very diligent, very hard, and eventually they became one of, to me, the most exemplary couples that I've known, because they've really learned from their difficulties and they work really hard, and they've got a very beautiful mind, and such beautiful minds, when they come to meditation retreats, are also the minds that experience peace and happiness very easily. Because it's the mind that is open, the mind that is able to accept reality. We're not trying to block out the truth, but we're quite happy to look at it. And so we can all try and see how many of our difficulties we actually can let go of and abandon just through this quality of patience and endurance. It's a marvelous quality, and that's why the Buddha praised it so much by saying it's a supreme destroyer of defilements. Because, like I said, some difficulties disappear there and then just by waiting, by being patient. We always want results. We always want quick results. We always want to experience what we want to experience very quickly. We're in need of this constant feedback from the people around us. We constantly need to be reassured that we're doing all right. We need to confirm that we're doing the right things, that everything is all right. We have insurances, life insurances, all these things which put us into this quite false, give us this quite false sense of security. Because life basically is uncertain. We just don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't. We don't know what karma we created in the past. We don't know what the situation is going to be like. But that need not be a cause for fear, because a society that runs on fear is a society where people are truly unhappy. So if you ever find that you are led to be afraid, be it through some economic crisis or through whatever happens in the world, then don't buy into that, because fear, quite honestly, is not the way to end difficulties. it will actually increase our difficulties. And so if we just have the open mind and just take it, as it comes, and then use our ability to look at it, deal with it, then we're much better off than always anticipating that something terrible is going to happen tomorrow. Yeah? Sometimes a situation, as bad as it looks, might actually turn out to be bringing good results, positive results. And like I said, because we have to actually use our wisdom when things go not as we wish them to go, there is that chance of developing our wisdom and understanding. If things always go the way we want, then we never develop any wisdom, never develop any understanding. Yeah? And that's what the Buddhist teaching is all about, isn't it? We're here to use this life not only to experience the good and the wonderful and the beautiful things that we can experience in a human life, but we're also here to learn. So if we develop an attitude where we're not just after pleasant experiences, but we're really after using whatever we experience to learn and to become more wise, then that's actually a more skillful way to live our lives, and that's something that the Buddha would have praised. So that's something to consider. Most people, they go through life always expecting that things go the way they plan, or expecting that everything will come their way, but it's just not the way it is. So sometimes we have to come up against these problems and difficulties. One of the things also is I said that this morning, I tried to make a point, the critical faculty of most Western educated people, because we're taught to think. We're taught to use our thinking mind to scrutinize, to analyze, to deliberate, contemplate, reflect, whatever you want to call it. And it's always with the aim of, quite often, finding fault. So we're looking for the wrong in everything. When I went back to Germany for the first time, it was quite depressing to see how all my friends were complaining all the time. It just seemed as if nothing was ever good enough. There was always this complaining about everything. And I said to them, you know what, you're complaining, you're moaning on a very high level. Because quite frankly, their life was pretty comfortable compared to some people's lives that I have experienced, and certainly that we can see if we really open our eyes and look around how many people in this world have to live, under what conditions they have to live. And yet, they were still complaining. So many things were just not the way they wanted them to be. And so I said this morning to the people closing off the retreat, sometimes it's good not to just look at the particulars, not to look at the things that are wrong, the details, but try to see the whole picture. Try to look at the whole, seeing the whole of a situation, seeing the whole of a person, seeing the whole of a country or a world or a Buddhist society. And just reminds me of something that happened to me recently, where my wisdom, which is easily put into words, but at that time it was put to the test because things went wrong, because as you know, I'm just about helping out, establishing a new monastery, and we were trying to fix up this meditation hall, making it look beautiful, because it looked quite ugly. It was just tiled floor and just white walls, and the ceiling was ugly windows, big heaters in there, and it was just a terrible hall. It never really had the atmosphere of a meditation hall. And so we used all our funds that we had to make that hall really look nice, because we thought that's the place where the monks and the lay people meet, so we should really put effort into that. And so I spent like 2.5 months working really hard every day, helping to make this hall into a nice meditation hall. And the final touch was supposed to be the person who came to lay the parquet right? So we thought a wooden floor is nicer for meditating. It's also easier to keep clean. We didn't want carpets because you have to vacuum then, and they always get smelly and tacky. So I figured a wooden floor would be the nicest way of going. So everything was finished. We had clay walls with wall heatings, because in Germany you get about minus 17 degrees in the winter. And so we had some pipes that have hot water running through them in the walls, and they're clay walls, which is a very nice earthy kind of feeling, very, very appropriate. We had put the ceiling a little bit higher so we get a nice Buddha statue in there. And then all these things worked out really well. And then this parquet person came, and he was supposed to be the god of parquet layers. He was supposed to be the expert, praised by the architect, and he was supposed to be really good. So he came on a weekend because he was going to do it a little bit on the cheap, because we weren't all that wealthy. So we thought, okay, you come on the weekend, 2.5 days should be enough, no problem. So he started working. And then he finished sometime late at night, 10 o'clock, and they left. And then the next morning I went into this hall, and I didn't know whether I should cry or laugh or get angry, or I didn't know what. I was absolutely speechless. You know, they have these sandpaper machines that swirl, you know, the big swirly machines, you know. And you look at this floor, and it doesn't matter what angle you look, you always see these swirl marks, really deep swirl marks, you know. And I figured, you know, didn't he know that he's supposed to be using a little bit finer sandpaper before he goes on to polish or whatever? And then the oil, he oiled it. We didn't want varnish. We wanted to oil it. So there were like wet patches here and there that were really shiny, and there were other places which are really dry, and some places hadn't had hardly any oil. And the edge of the monk's platform was really rough, and it wasn't well done. And there were places where the nails were still sticking out, and around the edges they were really thick, gooey. You know, when the oil goes gooey, when it's not rubbed in properly, it was sort of gooey bits. And he did a bad job on the piece of carpet over the steps. And anyway, I don't want to go on, but this is what I'm trying to say. There's so many things that immediately my mind saw all the mistakes. Now within, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes, I could make a long list of all the things that this guy did wrong. And then I sort of saw my heart sort of sinking, and I'm thinking, well, this is supposed to be the finishing touch now. This is terrible. This is really bad, you know. And so then I kind of quickly caught myself, and I thought, if I just complain about these things now, surely he had to rectify it. Yeah? There's no doubt he had to come back and redo it. There was no doubt about that. Yeah? But if I were to just dwell on those particulars, it would just spoil the beauty of the rest of the whole. Because the rest of the whole, everything, if you didn't look for the details, even if you just looked from a distance, even that floor didn't look so bad. But if you look carefully, you saw it wasn't professional. There's no doubt about that, you know. But then I thought, isn't that wonderful if you can just see the whole, embrace the whole of a situation or of this, because so many things have come to help and to aid this monastery becoming a very, very beautiful place. Everything seemed to really fit. So if you looked at the whole, it was a marvelous scenario. It was a marvelous situation. There were good people putting in hard work, and people were helping out. There was a lot of interest, and the Thai community is there. They were so happy they had monks, so their German husbands can finally get to hear something from the German monks, so the wives couldn't explain before. So everybody is really happy. It was a great situation. And there I was, just dwelling on something, you know, if you look at the great picture, seemingly insignificant. And I'm just sort of telling this story as an example, so you can sort of, you know, see in your own lives where if you look at the whole picture, if you look at the whole of a person, there's always more beauty and more goodness to be found than we sometimes are willing to perceive and detect. So not to be dwelling always on the negative, not to be always complaining, because if we want to make the mind peaceful, and that was the context I tried to explain it to the people this morning, if we want to make the mind peaceful, yeah, then if we always dwell on the particulars, yeah, the mind is always restless. It's always kept restless. It's always moving. It's moving from one thing to another thing to another thing, yeah, and it always picks up the faults. Yeah? It always compares. It always judges. It always what's the word? Ascertains. It's always on the move. It always has to do work. Yeah? And if we want to become peaceful in meditation, what we really have to do is just not look at the particulars, but look at the whole. Yeah? So we embrace our whole being, yeah? Our self, our character, our flaws, our good points, our weak points. Yeah? We embrace our whole personality, accept it, and develop a sense of contentment, a sense of ease with it. Yeah? And from that, seeing the whole of ourselves, yeah, we can let go much easier than if we keep dwelling on the particulars, the faults, the flaws, the things that perhaps are not so right. Yeah. So that sometimes when there are difficulties in life, we can, in order to deal with them more in a way that is more peaceful, in a way that is more at ease, we can just first of all step back from the problem and try to see the greater picture, and then we got a better perspective than if we just immediately zoom in on all the bad things, the hard things, the difficult things, the problems. So to me, that's another way that I found useful. One, to solve difficulties, and also, perhaps more importantly, to calm the mind, because that's the most effective way of overcoming difficulties, is to calm the mind, to put everything down for a short while. And that's a skill that we all should really aspire to learn, because difficulties, as I said, will always arise. But if we know that and can accept that, then we have a chance to allow those difficulties just to be set aside for the time that we actually meditate. We don't have to be so obsessed with the difficulties, because, hey, we've got difficulties. The Buddha was right. It's normal. Yeah? So it doesn't mean that we don't deal with the difficulties. It doesn't mean that we try to deny the difficulties, but it means that we know them for what they truly are, just the gap between two periods where there are no difficulties. And the times where we have no difficulties is just the time between two periods of difficulties, because they will always change. And if we know that, then we have a chance to just step back, allow those difficulties just to be what they are for the time being, but not let the mind be obsessed by them. We can put them down just for a little while, and then assume the meditation posture, try to see the greater picture, and from that let go, at least for the time of the meditation. And I guarantee if we pursue that, if we really work at that hard, which is the most difficult thing to do, yes, I agree, but it's also the most worthwhile thing to do, because that's truly the best way to overcome difficulties. Because when the mind is peaceful, yeah, and all these things actually disappear, literally disappear from the mind, even if it's just for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, 1 hour, depending how long you sit. Once you come out of that meditation, those difficulties will look completely different. You'll have a completely different perspective on those problems, because the mind has now experienced a state where those difficulties weren't there. Why were they not there? Because we allowed them to just stop, to just be set aside for a little while. And that's the whole point of meditation, is to be able to set aside the past, set aside the future, set aside what obsesses the mind, and just allow the mind to see itself. The mind seeing the mind, the Buddha said, is the path to liberation. Usually the mind only looks outside, looks at things outside in the world. But the mind looking at the mind, seeing the mind, that the Buddha said is the path to peace. So we should all aspire to do that. Many of you think, oh, I have no time, I have so many responsibilities and I have so many things to do. But the fact is that you have time to eat, you've got time to breathe, you've got time for your recreation or whatever else you do. Yeah? So making that time for meditation is really the most effective way to deal with, our lives. And not just with the difficulties, also to deal with the good things. One of the other ways of looking at it, if we suffer, what we should ask ourselves is why. Because there's always a cause for suffering. You know what that cause is? You want something to be other than it is. It's a very simple, very, very simple truth. Yeah? Adapted from the Four Noble Truths the Buddha taught. Yeah? Our teachers in Thailand always used to say, are you suffering? Are you suffering now? Yes, are you suffering? Or Ajahn Sumedho was always asked by Ajahn Chah, is Wat Papong suffering? Is the monastery suffering? Yeah? Just to make him look, at the truth. Wat Papong wasn't suffering, the forest wasn't suffering, the situation wasn't suffering. The suffering was in his mind. And the suffering is in our mind. So if we suffer, if we are going through a hard time, the first question we should really ask is, why? Why am I suffering? And I guarantee, if you really look, the answer is always because you want something to be other than it is. It's the desire, the craving, the wanting, the longing for things to be the way we want them to be. And if we can just accept that, quite often part of the problem, if not the whole problem, again disappears if we give up that false hope, that idealistic hope that, we should always be experiencing the things that we want, because that's just not the way it works. And so then we can take up the situation, look at the situation and deal with it without that obsessive desire, because the stronger the mind is obsessed, the more the mind is obsessed with getting what it wants, the less clarity there is in the mind, and the less able the mind is to actually deal with the problem skillfully. Yeah? Again, that stepping back, putting down that obsessive desire or longing or craving for what we want at this particular time, will allow us to just see a lot more clear. Yeah? We get things in perspective. It's no longer that big a deal. Yeah? So that's another way, just using the method that the Buddha taught himself. Four Noble Truths. Why are we suffering? See the cause, let it go. But of course, we don't want to let go. So we have to keep suffering. That's all right. Go for another few lifetimes until you're fed up. Eventually we're all going to be so fed up with it, then we just let go. Not wanting anything. Wouldn't that be wonderful? But it's just so hard to do, isn't it? Because there's so many nice things out there that we would like to have, and so many good opportunities and beautiful people and beautiful things and situations and whatever. And we want it all. We want it all. So that's why what the Buddha called the renunciation. Sometimes it's a word the lay people are really scared of. Oh, renunciation sounds terrible. I must shave my head, go and live in a monastery. But renunciation is something that really is something that starts for a Buddhist also in the middle of lay life, because even keeping precepts is a form of renunciation, because you're renouncing to do a lot of things which cause a lot of problems and suffering. So being someone who keeps precepts, right there, you are cutting at the root of many, many, many problems. If you really look at the problems in life, the difficulties in life, you can usually put it down to some breach of the 5 precepts. Alcohol, lying, stealing, adultery, what's the other one? Killing. Whatever problems we have in life, they arise because of greed. That swine fever or whatever it's called that's going around is a total result of greed. I don't know what they fed these pigs in wherever it was or whatever to make a fast buck, and now they got the problem. Now, all these things are the direct result of greed. Greed and lust are the things that really make this world go round. And so renunciation doesn't mean that we have to shave our head and become monks and nuns, and that's terrible. Who wants to do that, you know? But but it means honestly looking at where the problem lies and then renouncing the causes for those problems. And just by keeping the 5 precepts, we renounce a lot of unskillful action that will really help in our life to cut away at a lot of problems. Like I said, most problems, look at the problems arising from adultery. You know how many people come to me? They only don't come to the monks because they all have such a great time. Usually they come, like I said last time, because their wife's sort of whatever playing around, or the husband is playing around, or the kids are on drugs, or something else happens. The problems everywhere. But why are they there? Because of greed, because of hatred, because of delusion. And because people do not want to restrain themselves. They don't want to rein in their greed. They don't want to renounce their seeming birthright to just indulge in the pleasures of the senses. It's quite all right to enjoy the pleasures of the senses for a layperson. And there's nothing wrong with that, so long as we do it within the confines of ethical conduct. Because then everybody can benefit, everybody lives in a way that is respectable, and we have the self-respect, we don't have the remorse that leads to depression and what have you. So being able to really look at the benefits of living an ethical life is something that is bound to help us solve a lot of problems. Sometimes people think, well, in this world everybody is greedy, and everybody is trying to get their own way, and everybody is lying, everybody is cheating, so why shouldn't I? Well, why should you? If you really look at it, if you're really honest about it, look back, how much did we benefit from it? It's only always in the short term that we benefit. And sometimes even in the short term we don't benefit. But certainly in the long term, who wants to deal with a guy who always lies? Who wants to deal with someone who always cheats and steals? Who can trust anyone who's famous for being an adulterer or an adulteress? It's just, it's terrible. And yet, because of our delusion, we don't actually want to see that. And so that's the job of, say, something like a talk like this, is to remind ourselves, to be honest enough to look and see, well, what are the real problems? And where do they arise? What do they arise from? And then having the courage to just tackle them at the root, tackle them where they really need to be tackled, and not sort of hope for some miracle. If I go to the temple and get the right medallion, then everything will be all right, People kill themselves over certain medallions. There's a very famous one in Thailand which has this leklai in there, which is a metal that is the wealth of the Naga realm, and it can prevent bullets and everything. I've got a piece which is famous. It's supposed to be, I didn't try it, and I don't think I have that much faith, but they said they tried it, and I believe them because those people wouldn't lie to me. You hold the medallion in one hand, and you stick your other hand in a bottle of hydrochloric acid. Nothing happens. So it's a pretty good medallion. So anybody want it? But that's not going to solve the problem, is it? Doesn't matter how many medallions we have, doesn't matter how many charms we have, it's really up to ourselves. It's really, looking to the roots in our own mind. That's where really we solve the problem, the big problem. Yeah? And so that's why we need to, have the courage to face up to what they kept calling on the retreat, the real world. Yeah? But facing up to the real world with the real or the right attitude. Yeah? Because if we keep deluding ourselves thinking that, somehow we can cut corners and we can, get away with things, then those problems will persist. They will persist, I guarantee. Yeah? But if we come clean and we really begin to try our best to lead a good life, then things will work out in our favor. But then again, there comes this impatience again. We finally decide, okay, we're going to act together. We're going to keep the 5 precepts. We're going to stop messing around, be really good people. And then still, we come up against problems. And people are taking advantage of us, and things go wrong, and we lose our job or whatever. The wife runs away or the husband runs away. And then we say, now I kept the 5 precepts for 2 months, and still everything goes wrong. So what's the point of keeping the 5 precepts? To hell with it. Yeah? So we got to be patient, because remember, we're still reaping the fruits of our past actions. Yeah? So even if we start, from scratch now, we're still going to be subject to experiencing the results of our past actions. Yeah? So we need to have that patience and that endurance. And like I said in the beginning of this talk, sometimes that patience and endurance it really works marvels. It really works wonders. It's a great quality. And it's such a shame that in this day and age everything is so fast. We just don't have the time. If you did have the time, I'm sure many of you would spend a lot more time in meditating. But it's just so difficult, isn't it? We need to spend so much time, sometimes on the job, sometimes so many responsibilities, But if you really look into it, just see if you can really make priorities, and see if you can, find a way of really incorporating this beautiful teaching of the Buddha in your life, because there's so much there. I always keep telling people it's like a treasure chest, It's just we need to open it up and look at it. It's just an amazing amount of just wonderful teachings in there, and they're all applicable to our lives. Yeah. So saying the other day, it's like even the scientists today, they should read the Buddha's teachings, because then they wouldn't waste so much time on all these experiments, because a lot of the things that they're trying to find out, the Buddha already said 2,500 years ago. There's so much valuable information there in the Buddha's teaching that we can apply, and we just have to give it that time. You have to give it that time, and then allow those things to sink in, and just allow our lives to be transformed. Many people who have actually taken up those teachings in earnest, if you hear them, 5, 10, 15 years down the track, they really say it just not, I'm not joking. A lot of people have come to me and said, that these teachings actually saved my life. And so it's wonderful when you hear that and you see that. And so one thing to always remember, there is a lot of us, there's a lot of Buddhists, even though we may live in a society where perhaps we're not always encouraged to keep the precepts or meditate or practice the Dhamma. But sometimes it's good just to reflect on the whole of the Buddhist community. That's why I always like to encourage people to keep the Uposatha days, the moon days. These days it's not so convenient because it always interferes with the work days. But in the old days they had the moon days, and you knew, the monks, for instance, they have the Patimokkha, the recitation of the rules, is on every full moon and on every new moon. And we've agreed among all the Sangha that we keep to the Thai calendar, even though we're living in the West. So even the astrological full moon may be out by 1 or 2 days, we still keep to the Thai calendar. Why? Because then we know wherever we are in the world, on that day, all the monks would have the Uposatha day. And it's just a wonderful thing to recollect. There are people going to the temples, practicing, and the monks coming together, reciting the Patimokkha. So we need these reminders. We need those reminders in society. We need those ways of keeping ourselves reminded of what we're supposed to be doing, because we forget. It's the nature of the mind. If it goes out into the busy world, so many things happening. If we don't keep reminding ourselves, then eventually the mind will just, as I said last time, it will just flow down like water to the lowest point. We need to make that effort. And the best way to rouse that effort is to keep reminding us by reading the teachings, listening to the Dhamma, come to the center, meet with your friends, meditate together and discuss the Dhamma, so that you can all progress on this beautiful path and hopefully not have too many difficulties in your life. So I think I'll end this talk, and perhaps if there'll be a few more questions, I'm sure there'll be some more time. Yeah, somebody was just saying her grandmother used to say whenever we get frightened, we should recite the Buddha's name. And I can tell a few monk stories with regard to that, because the mantra Bhutto is a very well-known mantra, especially in the Thai forest tradition. They used to just repeat the word Bhutto, 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 sometimes slower, sometimes faster, sometimes in conjunction with the breath, depending on their temperament or whatever they like. But this mantra Bhutto, one is a recollection of the Buddha, so it's called Buddhanusati, it's a form of meditation. But also it's a mantra just to rein the mind in, to keep the mind focused and centered on one object, so it doesn't stray off into thinking about the past, the future, and so on and so forth. So sometimes when the monks were in the forest, because in the old days there were a lot more wild animals in the forest, and there was this little novice. He was supposed to be looking after this senior monk, and they went into the forest and to meditate. And but he was very sloppy. He would just sort of doze off and never do his meditation, and he just couldn't be bothered. He didn't do his job right. And so one day there was this tiger that showed up in front of his meditation platform, where his meditation platform, where he had the mosquito net and the umbrella. He was sitting under his mosquito net, under the umbrella, and he was just sort of thinking silly thoughts about the world, how he wanted to disrobe and all that, and probably thinking about food or I don't know what, And then this tiger just sort of snuck up on him, and he probably thought, oh, this is a delicious meal, And then the novice just saw this tiger, and immediately the mind went, Bhutto, 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 Bhutto. And I've heard pretty much exactly the same story with regard to snakes and I don't know what, because it's just the nature. You're told this, and then the mind naturally is lazy. But then when difficulties come up, which is quite nice, relevant for this talk, or when a real threatening situation comes up, that's when people go to the church. That's when they go to the temple, when their life turns miserable. If everything goes right, like I said, when life is easy, when it flows like a sweet song. But, a man or a woman worthwhile is a man with a smile when everything goes dead wrong. So difficulties, that's when we are reminded to use the Dhamma. And the word Buddha, because it is wholesome, because it's a wholesome word, it's reminding us of the Buddha, is one effect, but also the fact that the mind concentrates when it recites it. So there are two things in one that can actually help in a situation like that. And I don't have a doubt that might be something that can protect us in certain situations.
Whenever we see a monk, he's always smiling. Monks are very happy people because they have so few things beyond spiritual asset. They have nothing else. He has only 1 or 2 ropes. My cupboard, I have more t-shirt to last 3 lifetimes. And I think the ladies you are no better. So I think that the less we have materially, the happier we'll be, the easier our life will be, the less difficulty, suffering there will be. So many people who have been to Myanmar, Indonesia, Thailand, and these poor backward countries, they come back and they tell me, wow, those people, they don't have so much, but they are contented and they are happy. So my question is it true?
He was talking very skillfully, but in the end he passed the buck to me, you know. Now I'm in trouble. No, but I say straight away that it doesn't really depend on how much you have, because, you know, I know a lot of people who have a lot and they're totally miserable. I know a lot of people who don't have anything and they're totally miserable. But I also know a lot of people who got nothing and they're very, very happy. And I know a lot of people also who are very, 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 very wealthy and they're also very, very happy. Yeah. So it is how we use what we have, what attitude we have towards the things we have, and what mental qualities we develop that make us allow us to make the right or the wrong use of those requisites. Say in the Buddhist teaching we have for the monks, we have the 4 requisites, the basic 4 requisites which are given to you and taught when you first ordain as a monk. Is your robes to protect you from fleas and flies and cold and heat. There's the alms food, yeah, that gives you enough food to live one more day and one more night. Because you're living literally from day to day on the alms food. Sometimes you don't know whether you're going to get anything to eat the next day, depending on where you live. Then there is the shelter, a roof over the head, and for the monks, sometimes that would just be at the root of a tree, you know, just sitting under the tree. Especially in the old days, it was like that, when monks would still walk about on the Tudanga practices. And then lastly, medicines in the times of sickness. And so these things, everything else is extra, yeah? But how we use that extra, and what kind of attitude we develop towards the things that we have in life that are extra, yeah? How much generosity do we have? Are we really sharing the wealth that we have? Because quite frankly, someone who is very, very stingy certainly will be less happy. Some people are very wealthy, but they don't even know how to enjoy their own wealth for themselves, let alone help other people partake of some of what they have. Yeah? So it really depends on the attitude that we have. Yeah? Because honestly, and that's where Po Cheng was really right, we don't need much. Yeah? We hardly need anything, in fact, to be happy, if we have the right attitude. Yeah? Because all we need is something to eat, something to cover the body, a roof over the head, and medicines in times of sickness. Everything else is extra. Yeah? So that's why the path that the Buddha taught for monks and nuns, it works. Because it is a fact that you don't need more than those things. But Po Cheng was wrong when he said that that's all I have. I have a few gadgets of my own because I like recording teachers. So I got a few quite expensive recording devices. But I can assure you, if someone took them away from me tomorrow, I wouldn't be sad. It would be sad because I couldn't record anymore, but it wouldn't necessarily trouble me, or I wouldn't lose a sleepless night over those things. Yeah? But I look after them because that's how we're taught. And that's another important thing with regard to your belongings, to your wealth. Really look after it. Yeah? We had to make our own robes when we first ordained. I couldn't ordain until I made my triple robe. I had to sew them all myself, and I didn't know how to sew when I was young bloke. Didn't know. Yeah? So I had to sew them, and my Sangati certainly wasn't the prettiest one because it was the first sewing that I made, and it looked pretty terrible in places. But I kept that Sangati for 10 years. It was my robe. I looked after that for 10 years. Why? Because I made it myself. I put effort into it. Yeah? And so, not to take what we have for granted is one of the important ways of really being able to enjoy your wealth, yeah? And then also sharing it. And I've been to a lot of Arab countries when I was traveling. I've been to Egypt, Morocco, Turkey, and those places. In those days, I mean, they're still as poor as they were 20 years ago, I'm sure. But the point I'm trying to make is those people, they had very little, yeah, but they were willing to share what they had, and that was just wonderful. You came in there and you were just invited to their family, and they would share their meal and let you sleep there and look after you, and it's just wonderful. And so that's one of the things is this sense of togetherness, yeah, that we're living in this world together. We're a big family, this human race. If we could use or utilize our resources, yeah, to share them out, it would be wonderful. Yeah? But our system is just based on greed, yeah? And so if you're not a greedy bastard, you're sometimes it's terrible, because a lot of those people they live in misery and poverty because other people are so greedy that they're not willing to share around what would quite frankly be easy to share around. Yeah? You look at the salary of some people, and then you look at those poor people who've got nothing. Yeah? But it is just something that it's a truth, it's a reality, and quite frankly, it's always been like that. So we shouldn't really hope that's going to change very much. But what's important is that we change our attitude towards it, that we don't buy into the same game, yeah? That we keep our priorities straight, yeah? Because quite frankly, how we live in this world, how we use our resources, is the way which determines, how our lives are going to turn out. So I'm not sure whether that was relevant to what you were trying to say. Anyone want to come back on that? Yes. No, I said to people on the retreat, I personally never had problems with that, but that's just my character. Like, I was brought up in a way that we used to travel a lot. I used to see many different countries, eat many different kinds of food. So when I first became a monk, and we just had one meal a day. Right? These days, in many places, they still have a breakfast because they do their work in the morning or whatever. Yeah. But in the old days in Thailand, when I was there, we just had one meal a day. Yeah? And you walk arms around before that. Yeah? Crack of dawn, you'd be walking off, sometimes 2 hours back and forth, and you didn't have anything in your stomach. Yeah? So you'd come back, so say 7:30, and then you still have to wait another half hour or so, and then the meal would be served, and you'd have one meal, and that'd be it for the day. Yeah? And I could easily live with that. It was never a problem. I never had the sort of classical food fantasies of a young monk. Just for me, it wasn't there, but for others, it was. So I personally never had a problem with that. So food's never been a problem, which doesn't mean there's not certain foods that I do like and that agree with my body, because that's just what I grew up on, and it's just quite natural for everybody. But I pride myself to be able to eat just about anything, I think. So and as part of being a monk, it's supposed to be easy to look after, whatever people want to feed you. Like I said, I got probably gained 2 or 3 kilos the last few days in Singapore because people have been feeding me so well. So I work them off again when I get to Thailand, just on one meal a day. Okay, maybe one more question before we finish off, because it's getting late. I have to squeeze a meal in before 1, as you know.
Yeah, well, but in the Tibetan Mahayana and the Chinese Mahayana, they take more than one meal. In Theravada, they take one meal. Is that in the Vijnana rules? The
Vinaya rules for the monk do not say that you have to have just one meal. So that's good question, because it's important to understand that the Buddha said you can and sometimes in the time of the Buddha they had a gruel before they went on alms round, And I know in some other monasteries where they have long walks before the meal, they sometimes have a gruel or porridge or something. But monks are supposed to be able to eat between dawn and noon. So in that period of time, you can have a meal or 2 meals, but according to the rules, you can eat from dawn to noon continuously, and it still wouldn't be against the rules. But you can't eat after noon. That's the whole point. So the idea is that you're easy to look after. You just eat during that one period of the day, and then that's it. You're done with it. So dawn, we looked it up. There's 3 kinds of dawn. I might as well throw that in because it was quite interesting. Something new we learned we researched that because we wanted to find out when dawn is in Singapore. So we could have the breakfast quite early. So there's 3 kinds of dawn. There's astronomical dawn, astronomical twilight, nautical twilight, and civil twilight. Yeah? And it depends on the degree of the sun to the earth. Yeah? So if it's, I don't know the numbers anymore. JJ can probably remember them. Hello, JJ. You want to you do your piece? What is it? 8? Was it 8 degrees? Is it 6 and 12? That's right. So at 12, below 12, it's considered, or at 12, I think it's considered astronomical twilight. When the sun comes up a little bit higher, it's called nautical twilight. That's when the army launches their dawn attack. So dawn for the army is nautical twilight, and that's also the twilight for monks, interestingly enough, because it's just that time when it just turns light. Yeah? Whereas civil twilight is for court cases when they determine whether a robbery was done at nighttime or daytime. They use civil twilight, which is yet later. Civil twilight means you can go out without a torch and you can already see things. Whereas nautical twilight is just before that. It's light, but it's not quite light enough to be civil twilight. So I don't remember why I said these things. Okay, it's in the context of eating. So depending on what twilight you take, if you want to take liberties, you take the astronomical twilight, and you can start eating. I think it's 5:40 or 50. So astronomical nautical twilight this morning was at 6:12. That's why we had our breakfast in the place we went this morning at 6:15. So just to finish to answer the question, so it's just not eating in the afternoon. So afternoon, evenings, then the monks aren't supposed to eat, and that's the vinaya that the Buddha laid down, and that's for all monks. Okay, should we finish off on that?